The former ANC member, Askari Tlhomeni Ephraim Mfalapitsa, is in court almost 40 years later for his alleged involvement in the assassination of three Cosas members. Mfalapitsa allegedly conspired with his colleagues in 1982 to kill there were four members, but eventually three died, and that attempt involved the use of explosives. The 67-year-old appeared in the Gauteng Division of the High Court, and that is in Johannesburg, for the first time yesterday. The case was postponed to Friday. Let's bring into the conversation David Forbes. He's an independent social, political and economic commentator at the Daily Maverick. David, thank you for your time. So you write a bit and you've done some extensive work on these issues of legacy from apartheid, David. How significant is it that we're finally getting to see this case of the so-called Cosas Four finally in court?
Firstly, Thulasizwe, thanks for having me, but I don't work for the Daily Maverick. I write for them on freelance, just to get that out the way. I think it's critical that these cases are all brought to court. The murderers of Timo, Haffajee, Agate, the Cosas Four, the Craddock Four. There's a whole string. There are at least 20 cases that were given to the Hawks in 2018, and it's actually shocking that it has taken so long for them to reach court, because after the TRC process, there were between 300 and 400 cases were handed over for prosecution for people who were denied amnesty. And the ANC government actually betrayed the struggle, they betrayed the nation, and they betrayed their own principles because they illegally put pressure on the NPA, the National Prosecuting Authority, to squash these cases. They illegally suppressed them for all these years, and it's only through the long, painful legal battles that the families and NGOs like the Foundation for Human Rights and pro bono lawyers that we have been able to get this far. It's shocking.
Yeah. David, while you're talking about the ANC betraying the struggle and betraying South African people by leaning on the NPA to not follow through on these prosecutions, we can say this with a degree of authority now, can't we? Given that some of these contentions are starting to emerge in some of these court processes, that actually there had been instructions around 2003 that drop this thing, let this thing lie.
Yes, what actually happened was that the sister of Thulasizwe Simelane, who was Thembi and Kariman, brought a court action in 2015, which actually opened it all up. And in her court papers was a affidavit from the former National Director of Public Prosecutions, Vusi Kohli, which actually detailed all of these issues. So what has actually happened since then is the NPA itself in 2019 actually admitted in court that they had been submitted to illegal political pressure by the government and by senior officials. Now, you know, there's a whole raft of senior ANC elders and members and MPs who are in government now who actually ought to be criminally charged with obstructing justice, because that's what they did.
While on that point, David, actually that segues nicely, because someone will ask, that's such a long time ago. Why not just let it go? We had a negotiated settlement with the constitution we have. We had a painful transition. Lots of wrongs were done on all sides. Why is it not an option to let these ones go, these issues emanating from the TRC?
I'll explain why. The reason is that the culture of unaccountability began at that point. It began when the clerk gave a quiet little amnesty to 4,000 South African Defence Force officers just before the 94 elections, and he gave them that under the sort of smokescreen of having gotten rid of nuclear weapons and our chemical and biological warfare capabilities. This was then followed up by Mbeki, who then took the TRC recommendations and only selectively implemented a few that suited like ANC. Now, there were 37 senior ANC members, including Mbeki himself, who were denied amnesty for like offences which had occurred, human rights violations that had occurred in exile, and so on, and a landmine campaign in South Africa. So all of these things were then squashed, because when the NPA wanted to prosecute apartheid perpetrators, the ANC was scared then that they themselves might be open to prosecution. So it was their selfish wish to avoid any sort of accountability for any sectors in the Angolan camps that started the entire process of not being accountable. And the reason we are in the trouble we are in now is because that started then and it was never fixed then. So
Lastly,
we have to, we must finish that in order for us to move forward.
Lastly, David, are you encouraged in any way that perhaps this will start gathering some steam? You mentioned 20 cases that you're saying were given to the Hawks in 2018, but we are talking more than 300 cases that have been recommended for follow-up and prosecution from the TRC. We've seen some of these, inquests that have taken place, including the Ahmed Timol one. We've seen some by families such as the families of the Cosas Four. You did a documentary on that, but also the family of Thulasizwe Simelane, Thembi Nkadimeng, the deputy minister now. Having seen all of these developments of the last few years, plus the partnership between the NPA and the Hawks, are you encouraged that this will gather steam in any significant way?
Well, I'm slightly encouraged, but my experience of all of these state institutions is that they move at a glacial rate. They are very, very slow. But like NPA had to be forced by a private court action to continue to act on cases where there was evidence where a prosecution could easily have gone ahead. Why do the lawyers have to bring court actions to force the NPA to act? Why do we have to force the SAPS to do their work and to supply documents and things? It's because they've been captured and because there is no culture of accountability. Now, the NDPP, Shamila Batohi, is trying to fix the NPA, but the families cannot wait. There are the perpetrators of these human rights violations, and some of them were so horrific you actually can't believe it until you read what actually happened at the TRC. The family members are dying, the perpetrators are dying, and ANC is just, there's this wall of silence, there's a pact of forgetting. And our president, Matamela Ramaphosa, has refused to answer any of the pleas of the families of the victims to institute a commission of inquiry into how it was possible that unlawful political pressure was placed by the government and by the president at that time and senior members of the ANC on the NPA to stop these cases. I mean, the whole thing is an absolute scandal, and our president is doing nothing about it. It's shocking, man. And I really hope that the youth, that the young people will start to understand that if we don't fix this mess, it's just going to go on, and the wounds and trauma will not end.
Right. David Forbes, thank you so much for your insights and your input. He is an independent social, political and economic commentator weighing in on, he calls it glacial rate at which things are moving around prosecution of cases that come from the TRC. Think about it. We cry and pine for rule of law. Let justice be done, though the heavens might fall. Well, the TRC was founded on the law, and at the end of it, the law dictated that certain people needed to be prosecuted. But guess what? It hasn't happened in democratic South Africa.